Our raging planet. Every day, the awesome forces of nature are at work. They destroy, they ravage, they kill. We will never control them, nor escape their wrath. We can only hope to survive. Anchorage, Alaska, 1964. The Earth shakes for an incredible 7.5 minutes, releasing the energy equivalent of 12,000 Hiroshima-sized atom bombs. China, 1976. Over 250,000 people die in the Tangshan province. Mexico City, 1985. More than 10,000 people are killed. Hundreds of thousands are left homeless. August 17, 1999. 15,000 are killed in Turkey. Thousands are buried for days. These are the terrifying outcomes of earthquakes. They have claimed more than 2 million lives in this century alone. No one knows for sure when they will strike, but when they do, they strike with the full fury of our raging planet, bringing death and destruction and amazing stories of survival. In 1989, Maureen Brunner had been living in San Francisco's historic Marina District for almost 8 years. It would take only 20 seconds to change her life forever.
Normally I didn't get home until like 7 at night, but on this particular day, the World Series was happening. I was having people over for dinner. I said, well, I've got to be home by 5 o'clock, and that's why I was home early.
At nearby Candlestick Park, the Oakland A's and the San Francisco Giants were about to start the third game of the World Series.
I got home around 4:45 and started making dinner, and I was just about to get into the shower when it happened.
At 5:04 p.m., as the country tuned into the game, the ground began to shake violently. The Loma Prieta earthquake of 1989 was massive, registering 7.2 on the Richter scale. 20 seconds was all it took to plunge the city of San Francisco into panic.
The force of the initial shock just catapulted me down to the floor, where I reached up, pulled the door open, and I pulled myself up into the door frame. And then in the next few seconds, the door frame started to come off in my hands. And I realized at that point that I'd better get out of the building because the building was possibly going to come down. What was really terrifying that went along with that was the noise, and it was the ground rumbling in combination with all the objects flying.
Getting out of her house before it collapsed took every ounce of strength Maureen Brunner could muster.
I just started crawling on my hands and knees, and I went down a flight of stairs, and I crawled out of the building.
Out on the streets, the dazed citizens of San Francisco were confronted with the magnitude of the quake. For many, the nightmare had only just begun.
Go home! We've had serious problems, obviously. Go home and secure your residence. Shut off the gas, shut off electricity, store water, prepare for aftershocks, prepare for 3 days of no services. You got 90 minutes of light left. You better make use of your time. Standing here ain't doing nothing.
The aftermath of an earthquake can be even more traumatic than the shaking itself. For Maureen Brunner, the experience was overwhelming.
I was alone when I got on the street. I was really in shock. And I heard all the sirens, and I went out to the curb, and I sat on the curb, and it's strange the things that go through your mind at a time like that. I was thinking, gosh, I don't have my makeup. You know, that was like the first thing. What am I going to do without my makeup? I don't have any identification. Who am I? I started to smell gas. and I got very, very scared.
Fires, ignited by broken gas lines and fueled by winds and debris, began to turn Brunner's neighborhood into a deadly inferno.
When I crawled out of the building, I knew there was a lot of commotion to my right. And actually, the building on the corner had just crumbled into matchsticks, and 5 people died in that building. I sat on the curb and I cried. I remember I was crying, and I had nobody to talk to.
The night ahead seemed endless. Fires raged out of control, and the ground was not through shaking.
And then I started thinking, well, when's the first aftershock gonna hit?
Hundreds of aftershocks can be felt after an earthquake. They can continue for months, some larger than the initial tremor. Already weakened structures can collapse, so rescue workers must act quickly to save lives before another aftershock strikes. For Maureen and thousands of other San Franciscans, the safest place to be was outside the city, but getting there would be nearly impossible.
I had parked down the street because I was having company and I left my garage vacant for them. So I had a key to my car and I was able to get into my car. Probably started the drive at about 6:30 or 7. It was traumatic.
It took Maureen 6 hours to reach Menlo Park, just 30 miles outside the city. Several huge sections of road had toppled during the quake, throwing many vehicles over the edge and crushing many more. A portion of the San Francisco Bay Bridge and nearly a mile-long section of the Nimitz Freeway also collapsed. If the earthquake had struck just 30 minutes later, these roads would have been jammed with rush-hour traffic, and the death toll could have been in the thousands. The Loma Prieta quake was the biggest tremor to hit the Bay Area since 1906. That quake released 16 times more energy than Loma Prieta. More than 3,000 people died, 28,000 buildings were destroyed, and hundreds of thousands were left homeless. Ever since, the city of San Francisco has been preparing for the next big one. The first step to surviving an earthquake is understanding why and how they occur. On a vast, slow scale, the entire surface of the planet is in motion. The Earth's crust is divided into broad pieces called tectonic plates, floating above the liquid mantle hundreds of miles below. These plates are constantly moving, driven by convection currents in the mantle. In some parts of the world, the plates collide. One plate slides under or past another. The immense forces push up the crust, forming mountains and volcanoes. 95% of all earthquakes happen along the boundaries between tectonic plates, also called faults. The force of an earthquake is measured by how much the ground shakes 60 miles from the quake's epicenter, the origin of the earthquake. This movement is measured by a seismograph and ranked by a logarithmic scale called the Richter scale, where each increase of 1 represents a 10-fold increase in movement. Although we know a great deal about why earthquakes occur and how they behave, predicting them is still unreliable. The best defense against an earthquake is preparation.
This house was not bolted to the ground in 1989, but I can tell you it is now. And there are certain things in this house that were not bolted to the wall in 1989, but they are now.
Methods have been developed to increase the chances for survival when an earthquake hits. For David Heinzman, that means reducing the risk of injury or death from flying objects.
This is a typical angle iron, an L bracket. It's very rigid, and during a severe or moderate earthquake, it can actually pull away from the wall or rip the piece of furniture. The state-of-the-art version is this flex bracket, and it's designed to do just that. That is, flex with the motion of an earthquake.
Heinzman's Los Angeles company has devised a simple but powerful demonstration of the need to secure contents, shaking a room just as it would be in a moderate quake. Then they rebuild the rooms, securing all the contents.
What you're seeing behind me is a demonstration of a 6.5 magnitude earthquake. The bookcase, the computer table, the table itself, the pictures, the file cabinet, and the cabinet doors have all been secured to mitigate loss or injury. This can apply to homes, hospitals, businesses, anyone who lives in an earthquake zone.
Early warning systems are helping too. Shock waves from a tremor travel through rock at about 2 miles a second. Seismic detectors linked by a radio and computer can register the shock and flash a warning instantly. This could give a city 50 miles away at least 20 seconds warning that an earthquake is about to hit. This may not seem like much time, but it can save lives. In the 1989 San Francisco quake, some fire engines were unable to get out of their stations because the doors couldn't be opened. The earthquake had jammed them shut. Now, at the headquarters of the San Francisco Emergency Services, they're using new technology. When an earthquake starts, a special seismograph picks up the first shock waves. Instantly, it sends out signals which sound an alarm and automatically opens the doors of all the fire stations before anyone even knows an earthquake is on its way.
Everybody, everybody!
Each precious second saves lives, and with each earthquake, new lessons are learned. In January of 1994, the Northridge earthquake rocked Los Angeles.
Hello, is anybody there? This is all the first floor underneath there. This is the second floor right here.
Is he underneath us?
Yeah. Is anybody in there?
It was the most expensive quake in U.S. history, with over $30 billion in damages.
Okay. Just keep on going through it.
Come on, Tigo.
You almost through, buddy.
It's okay.
It injured 7,000 people and left over 20,000 homeless, but there were only 72 deaths. Back in 1985, the people of Mexico City were not so lucky. The city shook for 3 horrifying minutes during a magnitude 8.1 earthquake. 6 hours later, a second quake registering 7.5 left thousands of residents trapped in poorly constructed buildings that had collapsed. As rescue workers raced against time to reach survivors buried in the rubble, a terrible reality was uncovered. During the quake, several of Mexico City's hospitals had collapsed, including the city's largest maternity ward. Somewhere beneath this mountain of broken glass and brick lay the hospital's nursery. Days passed and still rescue workers were unable to reach the babies, but the traumatized city did not give up hope. Finally, after a week buried in the rubble, the newborn infants were located, miraculously still alive. The babies survived because of a reflex in the very young, which reacts to trauma by putting their bodies in a state of suspended animation. Even here, amid the destruction of a powerful earthquake that claimed over 10,000 lives, there are extraordinary stories of survival. The survival instinct is a powerful force in all of us, but for some, the trauma continues long after the ground beneath their feet stops shaking.
You really don't let go. You always think about it. I'm always thinking when I'm on the freeway, for example, I will not stop my car under an underpass. When I go to the symphony in San Francisco, I worry while I'm sitting in the symphony. I think the earthquake of '89 was a real eye-opener for a lot of people who are native Californians. I don't think people should take it lightly, because it could mean your life.
Sometimes our raging planet disguises its brute power with incredible beauty. Like a graceful cloud of snow cascading down a mountainside. But make no mistake, there is great danger here too. In just the blink of an unbelieving eye, you're engulfed in a deadly churning mass of snow and ice. There is nothing you can do to save yourself but wait until it's all over. They have been called the White Death. Their power is relentless. And in the winter of 1999, they took the Alps by force. Caused by record snowfalls, avalanches threatened villages and ski resorts throughout Europe. On February 9th, 1999, the French village of La Tour was hit. 12 people lost their lives. On February 21st, 11 died in Switzerland. Worst hit was Austria. In the tiny village of Galtour, a massive avalanche killed 31 people, 11 of them children. Avalanches kill roughly 200 people every year. They can reach speeds of over 100 miles per hour. Survivors compare the experience to being caught up in a raging river. An avalanche can plunge 300 to 400 vertical feet in just 6 seconds. Whether you end up on top of the snow or buried alive is simply the luck of the draw. Julia Dundas was skiing in the Canadian Rockies with a party of highly experienced skiers when her luck began to run out.
Last March, beautiful sunny day, and 4 of us, we came out to go ski touring. It snowed a couple inches the night before. It was pretty warm. There was not a cloud in sight. It was just around 0. And then we decided to check out a slope. We picked out one, and at the bottom we did a snow pit.
Dug into the side of a slope, a snow pit allows skiers to check for a weak layer concealed beneath the surface. Made up of snow that has broken up from melting and refreezing, this unstable layer indicates ideal conditions for an avalanche.
We decided that it was okay to go up, so we hiked up the ridge. It's not a sure thing out here. We checked the snow and we thought it was okay.
What they did not see was a weak layer even deeper beneath the surface, a deadly trap their shallow snow pit did not reveal.
Well, I came down first, and I was waiting over on the side for my friends to come down, and the second person came down and seemed fine. And then the third person, he did 3 turns, and then everything came down.
Triggered by one of the skiers on the slope above Julia, a violent mass of snow came cascading toward her.
I just heard someone yelling, "Avalanche." And I was pretty far away, and it was just a faint yell, and I look up and I saw everything coming down. It's like a big surfing wave. So I tried to traverse out, and I didn't get out fast enough. So it just took me by surprise, just so fast, and it's so much force.
Julia was hit by tons of crushing snow traveling at nearly 80 miles per hour. It washed over her like a tidal wave.
It's huge force. I just remember being stuck in the middle. It's all white. It's just like being in the water in a surf. And you just struggle, but there's no way.
When the avalanche stopped, Julia was buried beneath the surface. Her friends were still at the top of the slope. Escape was virtually impossible.
I first started screaming, and I thought, just wait for a minute till it settled. There was no air. I just blacked out.
Speed is absolutely essential in avalanche rescue. There is no time to seek outside help because the victim will almost certainly be dead before that help arrives. After 30 minutes, half of all victims buried in snow are dead from lack of oxygen.
It's just a ski.
After 3 hours, only 1 in 10 survive.
We're gonna have to do a transceiver search. Now get out your
But
transceiver.
Dundas and her friends were equipped with radio transmitters.
Okay.
Okay, I'll start down this way. Okay.
Most experienced skiers and hikers carry them. They normally transmit a weak radio signal. After an avalanche, the searchers can switch them over to receive the signal from the beacon of anyone buried in the snow.
We're not getting anything, Chris.
The search is slow and methodical, and the victim may be dying, buried just yards away from rescuers and perhaps only a foot below the surface.
My legs were all twisted, and remember my one arm was caught underneath me, but I had my one arm up above.
So can you try probing in here? Feel in there?
No, nothing there. Nothing
Okay,
there.
just try over just a little farther, right in here.
Then one of my friends saw my blue fingertips sticking out of the snow, and they started digging from there.
Julia's friends knew they had to act fast. Avalanches can continue to kill even after victims are rescued. Hypothermia, shock, or internal injuries make it vital to get them off the mountain as soon as possible.
I just remember looking up and felt like I was in a big pit 200 meters down, and I was yelling at them like, help me, help me. But I didn't think they could hear me. And then it's like I came through, and there I was. They were slapping me on the face, getting me back.
Julia was lucky. She made it out with only minor injuries. But she was also prepared, and ultimately, that is what saved her life. The best way to avoid an avalanche is to know where they're most likely to strike. Understanding how snow crystals form helps in predicting when and where an avalanche might occur. Evaluating the chances of an avalanche takes skill and experience, even with modern technology. For forecasters, that means physically seeing what is happening in the snowpack. The basic method is to go out to a slope where there is a risk of an avalanche and dig a pit with smooth vertical walls in the snow. The layers in the snowpack reveal a great deal.
29.
To the untrained eye, the wall may look like a mass of snow, but these experts see something different.
It's a crust there to 30.
They can easily distinguish the different layers and how strong or weak they are.
129.
A simple magnifying glass tells them what they need to know. They examine what kind of snow crystals make up each layer.
Mixed forms, facets going to
The
round.
crystal is a strong indicator of the snow's strength.
Okay, Rob, I'm going to isolate the column to just below that crust. Okay, crust is
The next test is to see how well one layer is bonded to another. They isolate a column of snow and use a shovel to lever the snow away. The column breaks at the weakest layer.
moderate on the crust.
The experts interpret the results and decide just where the danger areas are. Their skill can mean the difference between life and death. But as Tim Auger found out, some things just aren't predictable.
The last thing I remember in the fall is realization that we were probably in space and falling down a giant elevator shaft, and I knew that it was all over, and I don't remember anything after that.
While mountaineering in the Canadian Yukon, Tim and a friend fell over 2,000 feet from a high ridge. They were saved from certain death by landing on a steep slope of weak snow. But the force of their impact started an avalanche. It swept them another 500 feet downhill. When it finally stopped, Tim found himself buried alive.
I woke up. I was encased in the snow. I wasn't sure whether I was dreaming it or not. It was just unreal. Something clicked in. My training or whatever kicked in, and I told myself, well, rather matter-of-factly, that the only thing you can do is try and relax, because you've got to conserve the oxygen supply, and there's no point, I know there's no point in fighting, because or struggling, it's only going to make matters worse.
Tim Auger was caught in what is called a wet avalanche. They occur late in the snow season when the snowpack is deep and the thaw is just beginning. Sometimes in these wet avalanches, the snow can flow like water. And although they move slowly, their weight is deadly.
The snow was very heavy, so that I felt like I was in a snug-fitting body armor.
Sealed in a chamber of wet ice and snow, Tim drifted in and out of consciousness.
When I first woke up and realized that I was inside the snow, what I first noticed in that case was that there was a tiny, tiny little space all around me.
Although buried in shallow snow, it would have been impossible for Tim to free himself without help. Luckily, Tim and his partner were also prepared that day. Equipped with radio transmitters, Tim's friend was able to find him in time.
Unless you're a fraction of an inch from the surface, there's no chance of you actually breaking loose in the snow. That goes for quite soft snow too. I mean, if you're 2 inches down under the snow and your arms and legs are completely covered, there's almost no way that you can move. And if you're any distance down there, you can't move a fraction of an inch.
Victims caught in an avalanche only move so long as the snow is moving. Avalanches stop in a matter of seconds. They don't slow down gradually. Once the leading edge is halted, the snow behind packs in, much the way snow is compacted by a snowplow. This compression changes the way snow crystals bond to each other. Losing 40% of its air, the snow becomes very dense, burying all in its path from trees to people. For the citizens of the towns and villages of the Swiss Alps, the avalanche is no stranger. Ever since a killer slide claimed nearly 100 lives in 1951, the town of Davos has been at the forefront of avalanche protection. On the slopes above the town, fences have been built in the avalanche starting zones, which prevent large areas of uninterrupted snowpack from becoming unstable. There are also massive deflection mounds and a catching dam designed to break up an avalanche's flow and prevent it from reaching the houses below. Here in Bear Pass in the Canadian Rockies, the solution is a 105mm recoilless gun.
Bridge clear. Loaded. Ready to fire. Fire.
The exploding shells can trigger small avalanches before snow builds to a dangerous level. If a shell does not trigger a slide, then that particular path is safe for the moment.
All clear. All clear. Ready to fire. Fire.
A slide of this size was a disaster waiting to happen, but using the gun allowed forecasters to choose the timing. The work of protecting the public from the danger of avalanches is unending. Our best efforts and our most powerful technologies can barely keep the threat at bay. Sometimes they fail altogether.
Everybody who's involved in the avalanche safety business always ends up saying that this isn't a science, really, is it? There's just so many variables that can't be controlled, that can't be understood. They're beautiful. They really are. They're just a beautiful force of nature to watch. They're awesome. But I also know that you know, the destructiveness of them.
The volcano, the most dramatic display of power on this raging planet. A terrifying blast of fire and lava surging up from deep inside the Earth. It is the most explosive force on the planet. A burning terror against which we are powerless. For the millions of people who live within the shadow of these giants, it's like sitting atop a powder keg, never knowing when and if it will explode. Created by movement of the great plates of rock that make up the Earth's crust, these tectonic plates float on top of the mantle of liquid rock, or magma, that surround the planet's core. The plates move as the intense heat inside the Earth creates giant convection currents that shift and break up the thin solid crust. Around the world, there are at least 1,500 active volcanoes. Whenever one threatens to erupt, scientists flock to the site to study for themselves nature's greatest display of force. It is a dangerous place to be, but for volcanologist Stan Williams, it is impossible to stay away.
I'm a volcanologist, and that means to me I want to study active volcanoes. Galeras is a volcano in southern Colombia, which is historically the most active volcano of the area, and Galeras was ideal. We caught it in the very beginning of it becoming more and more active.
Towering over the Colombian city of Pasto, the Galeras volcano had been dormant for decades, but there were signs Galeras was waking up.
It showed more gas, it shook the ground, people could hear noises and feel the ground shaking. And we went in there, and surely it was back to being active.
In 1993, Williams led a team of scientists on a trip to study Galeras. Although the volcano was now active, there had been no recent eruptions or explosions.
In mid-1992, it had an explosion. And since that time, in almost 6 months, it had been really quiet. It's still active, still dangerous, but quiet.
Unaware of what danger awaited them, a colleague of Stan's filmed their preparation before they headed up the volcano.
About a dozen people went into the volcano that day. We maintained radio contact with the observatory so we could hear about any changes. We had a great time, a few hours of working together with no sense of unusual danger at all. The volcano was a great subject of science. We're doing it. We're really working together.
In a matter of seconds, everything changed.
Well, we were close to finishing the work. It was midday when the clouds usually come in and it's time to leave. So I was standing on the edge of the crater, the rim, talking with one Colombian colleague and a tourist with his sons, looking down into the crater. It gave about 10 seconds of warning, which meant the ground shook. Rocks fell into the crater. I yelled, "We got to get out of here." Before anybody could really react, it exploded.
In the blink of an eye, Galeras released over 40 years of pent-up energy. Rock, ash, and lava spewed up from the crater.
Well, the explosion was extremely powerful. It just sent rocks flying all over, and rocks flew in all directions. Big rocks, hot rocks.
Stan did the only thing he could. He ran.
Rocks were as big as television sets falling around us. I made it 10 meters or something, I don't know for sure, but before the first big one struck me right in the side of my head, knocked a hole in my head, knocked me flat. I picked myself up and ran. Maybe another 10 meters before the next bad one broke my left leg and shattered my right leg. My fell on my face. My foot was barely attached. So I crawled to get behind a big rock because the rocks which are flying laterally, those are the killers, and I had to get behind some barrier which I found.
Unable to move, Stan lay there behind the rock as the eruption continued.
The eruption became then a column rising a few kilometers high, and ash and rocks were raining down for about 15 minutes. If a rock is coming right straight at you, it's the one which is going to hit you, so you have to roll out of the way. Finally, the eruption comes to an end for 15 minutes, but I'm on fire all over because the rocks were so hot they set my backpack on fire, burned into my back, my pants were on fire and everything.
Stan knew better than anyone what Galeras was capable of doing next. As he lay close to death, he feared a second eruption.
It's another hour later, another eruption. Not nearly as powerful as the first one. But we had studied the geology so much, I really thought when the second eruption began that it was probably the end. I had put together this history of how eruptions were these powerful, energetic things which cleared the throat of the volcano, and then pyroclastic flows came out over and over in the history of Galeras.
If Galeras behaved as Stan expected it to, surviving the second eruption would have been next to impossible.
I thought that's what I was going to see, a pyroclastic flow coming down the rim.
Pyroclastic flows are formed when heavy volcanic dust and ash are churned by searing volcanic gases. This highly destructive, superheated cloud rushes down the volcano's slopes at speeds of over 100 miles per hour. With temperatures exceeding 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, pyroclastic flows are hot enough to melt glass and incinerate virtually anything in its path. Luckily, Stan Williams was mistaken. The second eruption was not pyroclastic. 2 hours later, he was rescued.
It was the most energetic explosion we'd seen in 5 years, and it killed. 6 scientists were instantly dead, 3 tourists were killed, and I, by just a fluke, was close to dead, but not quite there. I was in bad shape, but I basically felt like I'm alive, I'm okay, I'll get back to work.
The explosion on Galeras killed 9 people that day, but the city of Pasto was spared the devastation of a pyroclastic flow. On the tiny Caribbean island of Montserrat, the Soufriere volcano was not so forgiving. Montserrat was a patchwork of lush green forests and fertile valleys. Known locally as the Emerald Island, it was paradise to American David Lee and the 11,000 other residents who called it home.
Montserrat was the most wonderful place, not only to visit, but to live. Beautiful, lush. I came here with my wife and 1 son just about 20 years ago, and the travel guides all said Montserrat was off the beaten path, the way the Caribbean used to be. The people are the sweetest. It was all true.
The Soufriere volcano had been dormant for over 500 years. Suddenly, it announced to the residents of Montserrat that something was very wrong.
It was here on July 18th of 1995 that steam eruptions began to take place up in the crater.
Gas and steam began spurting from high up on slopes above the capital city of Plymouth. Within days, the first eruptions began. For the people of this Caribbean paradise, life was never going to be the same.
It wasn't long after that, 3 or 4 months, I decided to take my camera and actually walk up the side of the crater. You can see it over there in the sunlight.
David Lee had been documenting activities surrounding the volcano since the initial blast. One day, he headed up the mountainside with his camera to see for himself what was inside the crater.
Don't do this at home. It's right in here you start to hear it. And it makes your heart beat real fast. There's a path that goes right up to the crater edge, and I said, well, I'm going to turn my camera on, and I'm going to show you what it looks like down in the crater. This is my last trip, and it's hot already, and it's spewing right now. There's an eruption right now on Langs. That's hot stuff going off. Just as I walked up to the crater rim, a phreatic eruption took place, throwing stones and pebbles and steam and ash up in the air. That's Star River. She hasn't fired up too bad. I'm just going to take a snapshot. And I'm getting out of here.
A cloud of ash and rock flew thousands of feet into the air, showering the slope that David Lee was desperately trying to make his way down.
And it began to fall down all around me, and I set the record for running down the side of that volcano. This is just for recording, in case something happens. I'm setting the record of going down Chances Peak. And she's blowing hot and heavy behind me. Right when I walked up to the ridge, she just let loose. And I'm heading down. It's 2,003 steps, and I'm catching every second or third one. But the thing about it is you gotta pace yourself. If you go too fast, you collapse. Oh. Okay, Lord, put my trust and faith in you. That was my last trip up there, folks. See the time. 5 o'clock. In case something happens, somebody gets this camera, you'll have a record. If the camera doesn't have a meltdown, I'm gonna shut her off and run.
The eruption was the largest phreatic explosion since the Soufriere volcano became active. A phreatic eruption occurs when rising magma reaches underground water. The water rapidly turns to steam, then explodes in a deadly shower of molten rock and ash.
Well, that's what you call in your face. Do I look scared? Let me take it and put it on auto. Now do I look scared? I'm not out of here yet. I'm only down about 600 feet. If the whole thing went, wouldn't have a chance up here. I think that's the closest I ever thought about being dead. The whole top of the mountain was just shivering, 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 up and down under your feet. And you could feel this awesome power underneath vibrating, wanting to come out. So to me, there's no doubt that down below there is magma that wants to come out. Oh, Lord. Bye.
David Lee made it down the volcano safely, but in volcanic terms, the eruption that day was minor. Over the next several months, the eruptions got stronger. The people of Montserrat began preparing for the worst. An exclusion zone was established on the southern side of the island, where residents were ordered to evacuate. More than half the population left Montserrat. For those that remained, dealing with eruptions became a part of daily life.
One day early on in the eruption, I was driving away from the volcano after an eruption, and the ash cloud actually came down over the area that I was in, and at high noon, everything turned to pitch black. There was lightning, thunder. We're at the height of the day, and it's pitch black, lightning. And I really wondered if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. It's high noon. And the guy ahead of me is just leading me out of here. I got one little pad. I mean, it went to pitch black like you were in an underground cave. Very scary experience. I'll tell you, it's getting lighter, but that doesn't help, you know? As we pass here, you can see bright skies up ahead.
Consisting of mostly ash and small rocks, The material ejected from the volcano that day was so dense it blanketed the island in a thick ash cloud and caused total darkness for more than 15 minutes. For the next 2 years, the pattern was the same. The volcano would swell up into a dome, become unstable, and then collapse into a pyroclastic flow. But there was still no final explosion. Then, in June 1997, there was a major eruption, much bigger than anything before. Almost the entire southern half of Montserrat became uninhabitable as pyroclastic flows rushed out in all directions.
Pyroclastic flows came right out of the face of the volcano here. Hot block and ash flow, some 600 degrees centigrade, rushed down the northern slopes of the volcano into the zone that they had said was the exclusion zone, but people had gone back in there to reap some crops that they had planted, and 19 Montserratians were killed that day. It was a very sad day in Montserrat.
Flow after flow gradually scorched and burned the once tropical valleys and hillsides. It happened again in August. This time, pyroclastic flows poured into Plymouth. "80% of the city was destroyed. The island of Montserrat was brought to its knees. By 1999, it had been nearly 5 years since the Soufriere volcano roared to life and transformed this quiet paradise. But it seems the quiet has returned. Most volcanologists believe the volcano is becoming dormant. The residents of Montserrat are beginning to feel they have turned the corner. And even though 1/3 of the island remains uninhabitable, people have started to return.
We're back up to 4,500, maybe 5,000, because the volcano now is gone back to sleep. And not only are people returning to Montserrat, but people are coming to look at this volcano and to see what's happened. It's a latter-day Pompeii, rising from the ash.
Ever since humans first witnessed nature's awesome power, we have been captivated by its beauty. Volcanoes are crucibles of change. They create many of the elements that make life on Earth possible. But survivors like Stan Williams also know that these incredible forces can destroy life too. After nearly 3 years, Stan traveled back to Colombia to confront the thing that almost killed him.
I vividly remember the first time I saw Galeras again. Got off the plane, and there's Galeras at the end of the runway, and it's like this monster that really worked hard on killing me, and we sat there and talked about death for a few hours, and I survived, and now I'm back.